Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, was released on the Game Boy Advance in Japan 2001 and on the DS in 2004 for North America. The game was adored by critics and fans alike, with many of them claiming that it is the best entry in the Phoenix Wright trilogy. Even decades later, many prefer the first Phoenix Wright game because of its fun and original concept and its ability to stand out on its own, rather than being the result of multiple games worth of build-up. Because of how beloved the game quickly became, Capcom went ahead and ordered a sequel fairly quickly. After the first game was released, Ace Attorney's creator Shu Takumi took a vacation, but as soon as he returned to the office, he was told by Shinji Mikami, his boss who was also known for his work on the Resident Evil series, that Capcom wanted a whole trilogy to be made. Oh, this seems like no biggie, just start by making a sequel real quick, right?
I need the full game on my desk in 5 minutes.
Despite his opposition, Takumi had to write the entire script for the game in just 3.5 months per the request of Atsushi Inaba, the game's producer. This is an insane deadline considering it took him 1 month to write each of the first game's episodes. But on top of that, he was also told that he had to write 5 episodes for this sequel, whereas the initial release of the first game only had 4 cases. Due to memory issues with the cartridge, the 5th episode was cut and repurposed for the 3rd game, and thus, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, Justice for All was released on October 18, 2002 in Japan, and in the first quarter of 2007 in North America and Europe. Yet despite how much of a success this game was, many find it to be an underwhelming entry. While that may be the case because it can be easily overshadowed by the incredible introduction that came before it and the even better conclusion that came after it, fans also find this game's case lineup to solidify its inferiority. So let's look back at Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, Justice for All to see if that's really the case. The game begins with Phoenix waking up from a nap in the defendant's lobby, only to end up with amnesia after getting hit on the head with a fire extinguisher. I hate when that happens. Since Phoenix has amnesia, him and the player get reintroduced to the core gameplay of cross-examinations and finding contradictions as we defend our client Maggie Bird, an incredibly unlucky policewoman who is accused of murdering her co-worker and supposed boyfriend. This makes the first episode a lot like the one we saw in the first game, where the story and characters take a step back so players can instantly attach to Ace Attorney's more engaging gameplay. Making this a tutorial case certainly wasn't necessary since players already know exactly how the game works, but the Lost Turnabout still does a really good job of showing players the more exciting parts of playing Ace Attorney. While this of course comes at the cost of a more significant story, the overall structure of the case makes this excusable. Sound familiar? That's because this case is basically just doing the exact same stuff that the first Turnabout did, which while fine, causes this case to feel a little forgettable. It still does a good job doing what it sets out to, but it would be interesting to see a more different approach to a tutorial case. We eventually end up cross-examining Richard Wellington, who looks a lot like the guy who hit us with a fire extinguisher, but we're too busy having amnesia to notice that. He's the actual culprit for this case, and one of the ways we prove that is by presenting Maggie's profile to show that he spelled her name wrong when trying to implicate her. Presenting profiles is a new addition to the series with this entry. While profiles in general were present in the first game, they were mostly there just to inform players on the characters. Here they do the same, but they can also be used to point out contradictions similarly to evidence. Presenting profiles is a neat inclusion and makes things a little more interesting than only being able to present evidence, and showing it off in the tutorial is a great way to show players one of this game's new features. However, it can make things a little more tedious since sometimes it's unclear on whether presenting evidence or a profile works best for a certain situation. Overall though, I think this is a neat addition, especially considering how all I used the profiles for in the first game was finding out everything I could about Gumshoe. Speaking of Gumshoe, he's one of the many returning characters that appear in this case, alongside Maya Fey and Winston Payne. Winston Payne was the prosecutor in the first game's tutorial case, and it's a good decision to bring him back for this one since he doesn't introduce a significant rivalry that distracts players from the gameplay. I like that they brought him back, solidifying his role as the series' punching bag because he shows up for 1 trial per game and loses the case. And I always found it really funny that Phoenix doesn't remember him after he gets over his amnesia. The other returning character is Maya, who was basically Phoenix's sidekick in the first game. However, that game ended with a tearful goodbye between the two, and now she's back like nothing happened, which I always just found kind of odd despite the fact that I don't necessarily think this is a bad move. But apparently everybody who has ever played this case except me thinks that everything about this case is a bad move. I mean, that case wasn't that bad, was it?
Not that bad.
Awful.
That's the worst thing that I have ever seen.
I would never play it. I would rather play Walt Disney World Quest Magical Racing Tour.
Since the tutorial case in the first game was so well received, the developers decided to do another one for the second game, but knew they couldn't have Phoenix as a rookie liar being led by a mentor again, and instead gave him amnesia. I will admit, yes, that's dumb and far-fetched, but is it really that big a deal? It allows this case to achieve its goal of focusing on the gameplay, which I think is another issue people have with this case. Instead of a case that really allows players to reunite with the characters they loved from the first game or introducing a great story, this episode chooses to focus on getting players hooked on the gameplay. A lot of people also just don't like that they have to go through another tutorial since they knew the mechanics from playing the first game. But again, is it really that big a deal? This case has commonly been cited as the worst one in the series, and I personally never saw why. Like, yeah, it has its issues, but it's an incredibly short and inoffensive Ace Attorney case, but for some reason people act like it's the worst thing they've ever played. And that's how you can tell someone hasn't experienced Walt Disney World Quest Magical Racing Tour. After proving that a baseball glove is in fact not a bunch of bananas, we win the case and Phoenix recovers his memories. Could you imagine if that's how it worked in real life?
So what's the verdict, Doc?
I'm sorry, Matthew, but you have amnesia, and the only way you can overcome it is if you win a court trial.
Okay. So what's the verdict, Doc?
He eventually remembers that Maya left and that they reunited prior to this case, meaning that the Lost Turnabout is the second case to take place chronologically in Justice for All. The game's second episode is actually the first one to take place in the story, so let's go ahead and start Reunion and Turnabout. You gotta be kidding me! After watching a random car crash, we're introduced to Turner Gray, a surgeon whose clinic got some bad PR after an accident a nurse made. He came to Phoenix so he could meet Maya and have her channel the spirit of the nurse responsible for the accident, so she could sign a document stating it was her fault. We then go to meet Maya at her home of Gurren Village, which is a fantastic setting. Unlike the previous ones we've seen, this is a location directly tied to a significant character. On top of that, we also learn some pretty interesting lore surrounding the Faye family and meet new characters like Maya's Aunt Morgan. Morgan Faye is a member of the branch family of the Faye clan, making Maya a member of the main family and therefore the next master of Gurren. But as soon as we meet her, Morgan just gives off this kind of weird vibe. She just seems a little mean-spirited and almost like she's putting up an act when she is polite.
That's code for I think she's gonna be evil.
There's also Eenie Miney, an acquaintance of Turner Gray who seemingly has no relevance to this case at first. Then we run into Lotta Hart again, who appeared for a bit in Turnabout Goodbyes from the first game. She's a fine enough character to bring back, but I personally feel like this case's cast is a little all over the place. Like overall, I wouldn't say there's much cohesion regarding all the characters and we just get introduced to so many of them at once. Like, you know when you start collecting something and none of them have any unity whatsoever? That's the cast of Reunion and Turnabout. After meeting these characters, the channeling begins, and you'll never believe this. A murder happens. Good thing I kept this on me. Turner Gray is the victim in this incident, and Maya ends up being the defendant, which feels kind of familiar, like I swear the same thing happened in Rayman 3 or something. Having Maya as the defendant was something that happened in the first game too, and at first I thought it was really odd that this case seems like it's supposed to be about Maya finally returning, but then she gets too busy being accused of murder for us to really see her, but making her the defendant makes her returning in this case specifically have a little more weight. To help us during the investigation, Maya gives Phoenix her Magatama. Presenting the Magatama to certain characters during investigations initiates a sequence in which players have to break a character's psych locks. Psych locks represent secrets that characters are hiding, and they can be broken by presenting evidence that usually tells us information about that character or a specific event they were involved in. This is basically a more laid-back version of the cross-examinations that appear during trials, but it's handled in a way that doesn't make the two feel incredibly similar. I think it's a pretty good addition since it really makes the investigations a little more engaging compared to the first game where you would mostly just talk to people. Psych locks add an extra element of mystery to the investigations and makes progressing a little more interesting and rewarding. To activate the Magatama, we give it to Pearl Faye, who is Morgan's daughter and Maya's cousin who appeared briefly at the beginning of the case. I think Pearl is a great addition, especially in Reunion and Turnabout. All of the other characters in this case are either suspicious, mean-spirited, or Lotta, so adding a more cheerful character like Pearl really brightens things up a bit. It feels like some of the other characters in this episode just have some sort of selfish role in this case, whereas Pearl is just like, yo Phoenix, check out this ball. Sometime after talking to Pearl, Gumshoe tells us that we'll be going up against Prosecutor Von Karma.
Oh yeah, that guy that was shot in the right shoulder.
No, the other one.
Oh.
Once the trial starts, we meet Franziska Von Karma, who serves as this game's main prosecutor. Initially that role was going to be reprised by Miles Edgeworth from the first game, but the team decided against it since he became a fan favorite and was supposed to be a prosecuting genius, so having him lose every case seemed like a bad move. Yeah, so just create a new character with an even bigger reputation for Phoenix to ruin, that makes sense. As much as I like Edgeworth, I think having Franziska as the prosecutor was a great move. It really helps Justice for All stand out on its own more, and making Phoenix go up against the successor of Manfred von Karma really expands the world of Ace Attorney. Yet unlike with Edgeworth, the dynamic between Phoenix and Franziska isn't a huge part of this game, which allows the story to focus more so on plot-specific cases rather than character relationships like in the first game. That's especially good for this episode, since the story of this case introduces us to some important plot points that we can expect the series to build on as it continues. Also, her whip and constant use of the word fool is funny, which I would say is a positive, but she whips Gumshoe, so I take back anything positive I have ever said about Franziska. This is another case where it's pretty unclear on what went on, which makes it super interesting to try and solve. It's kinda similar to Turnabout Samurai in that way, but I'd say the mystery is more captivating in this case. Unlike Turnabout Samurai, however, we actually know the defendant prior to this episode, so it's pretty clear that our client is innocent. That makes the mystery less about figuring out if the defendant is innocent, and more about proving how the defendant could not have done it. Phoenix eventually proves that it's a strong possibility that there is actually a third person in the room, and it's moments like this that make solving cases in Ace Attorney so interesting. Just one possibility is able to completely change the course that a case is taking, and doing so prevents the mystery from getting stale, since we get to look at it from different perspectives. The second investigation for this case begins, and we learn that Edgeworth died and Maya's Aunt Morgan is most definitely evil, just regular stuff. This case already wasn't nearly as lighthearted as some of the other ones we've played through thus far, but during this investigation segment, its melancholic story really gets put on display. Even when it barely starts with us talking to Pearl and she asks what a prosecutor is, Phoenix says that they're all evil and that Edgeworth died, but you can't fool me, Capcom, I've seen this game's box art. We're also given this shot that makes it incredibly obvious that Morgan is evil, which is another tragic element of this case since she's such an important figure in the lives of characters like Pearl and Maya. I wouldn't say that the gloomier atmosphere is necessarily a bad thing though. I do think it's done fairly well and is warranted in a case like this. I also think this case's tone really helps Pearl stand out since she's such a lighthearted character. Like when other characters in this case have Cyclops, it's to hide some huge lie they're building their lives around, while when it happens to Pearl, she's just like, I may have broken a vase. Speaking of Cyclops, we keep on seeing them on Eenie Meenie, and a large portion of the second investigation focuses on her. Phoenix tries to get information on her so we can solve the case, and we eventually end up at Hottie Clinic, where she underwent treatment after being involved in a car accident. This is where we meet someone who claims to be Director Hottie, who is the sole reason that I lock my doors at night. We find out about her time at the hospital, and more about the car accident she was involved in, which was likely caused by Turner Gray, giving Eenie more of a motive than anyone else in this case. By the time our second trial segment starts, it's pretty obvious that Morgan Fay and Eenie Meenie are behind the murder in some way. This again causes the mystery to be a question of how rather than who, which continues to make this case's mystery a little more interesting than some of the other ones we've seen. Morgan is proved to have been an accomplice pretty early on in this latter trial, and I think it's good that they don't spend too much time focusing on exposing her misdeeds, since it was pretty obvious she was up to something this whole time. Most of the trial is spent cross-examining Eenie Meenie, with a lot of her testimonies discussing the car accident she was involved in. I think that putting more of a focus on her during this trial was the right move since there's still a lot of questions surrounding her at this point. A few things point to how there's a strong chance she could have done it, but the climax of her cross-examination comes when we try to figure out more about the car accident she was involved in. Phoenix eventually points out that Eenie Meenie was actually the one who died in the car accident, and that Mimi Meenie has been assuming her identity this whole time. That was literally the one thing I didn't put on my bingo card. This is such a big plot twist that adds some great shock value, and it fits surprisingly well. Then the trial ends with Maya getting acquitted and Mimi being found guilty along with Morgan Fay. Apparently Morgan did this so she could make Pearl the Master of Kurain. Morgan was supposed to be a master, but her younger sister Misty had more spiritual power and became the next heir instead. However, as mentioned in the first game, Misty disappeared after getting involved with the DL6 incident, so the next heir became her daughter Mia, who died in the first game, so now the next heir is Maya. If Morgan could get Maya arrested, Pearl would become the next heir, and Morgan would become a member of the main family again instead of staying in the Branch family.
Don't worry, this becomes important later in the series.
Hey Matthew, what did I say about answering questions that nobody asked?
Ultimately, I would consider Reunion and Turnabout to be an incredibly solid yet overshadowed case. It's in this weird kind of in-between where it's not as high stakes or emotionally investing as something like Turnabout Goodbyes or Rise from the Ashes, yet it isn't as lighthearted or introductory as cases like Turnabout Sisters and Turnabout Samurai. While this isn't a bad thing, and I still think it's a great case, I found the much more serious undertones of this case to prevent it from standing out all that much. I don't think there were really that many fun things to remember like with Turnabout Samurai, and the tragic elements weren't given enough emotional weight and attention as the ones we saw in Turnabout Goodbyes. While Reunion and Turnabout certainly doesn't need those qualities to be a great case, the lack of such qualities stop it from standing out so much despite it still being a really good case. Don't get me wrong, I do think this case is an excellent inclusion. It helps introduce drama about the Fae Clan, Cyclops, and major characters like Pearl and Franziska, and the mystery is really solid, but it's just a little too par for the course for what you'd expect out of an Ace Attorney case for it to really stand out. With that said, let's go ahead and start our next case, Turnabout Big Top.
Just press the button.
No, come on, please, any case but this one.
Matthew, you wanted this game. You have to play every case.
I know, but just, this one's so bad!
You leave me no choice. Is this Detective Dick Gumshoe from Ace Attorney? Yeah, Matthew hasn't been eating his vegetables.
I'll play!
Episode 3 of Justice for All is Turnabout Big Top, which is potentially the most infamous case in the entire series.
You realize if you tie me up like this, you're gonna have to be the one playing the case, right?
It begins a couple of months after Reunion and Turnabout, with Phoenix and Maya taking Pearl to Berry Big Circus, home to Max Galactica, a magician who flies during performances. We eventually have the misfortune of meeting Max when we take on his defense, and the reason I say that is he is the most dislikable defendant we've seen thus far. I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself since we've only just met him, but he leaves such a bad first impression. He's just so arrogant, and when he eventually breaks and reveals he has no idea how dire of a situation he's in and that his real name is actually Billy Bob Johns, he's able to go back to that prideful persona like he doesn't need our help at all. After officially taking on Max's defense, we begin investigating at Berry Big Circus, so hopefully we meet some characters that are a little more likable.
Haven't you played this before?
All of these characters are just a total pain. Let's start with Mo. He's a clown, so his whole trait is that he tells jokes, and the joke's whole trait is that they're unfunny. This would be manageable if Mo just didn't have to tell so many, but no, literally every other line is a joke, then him laughing at it, so anytime you try to get anything out of him, you just have to suffer through a barrage of bad jokes to even get a shred of information. Then there's Ben, who is just as bad to interact with because he gets so shy and awkward that you genuinely cannot get anything out of him unless you hand him his puppet, Trillo Quist. He only talks through Trillo, who is the complete opposite of Ben. Instead of being quiet, Trillo will just not shut up and everything he says is so annoying. Instead of making a bad joke out of everything like Mo, Ben and Trillo make an arguably worse comedic duo show out of every interaction. Like, you do not have to put this much effort into telling me where you were last night! There's also Regina, the daughter of the ringmaster that was killed in this case. But instead of an emotional story about her struggles with her father's death, she's just this uninteresting character with absolutely no substance whatsoever when we meet her. I'd take this over something like Trillo, but I mean that isn't saying much. On top of the annoying characters, this is also by far my least favorite setting we've seen. I never really found a circus to be an interesting or fun concept, and Turnabout Big Top has completely stopped me from ever being able to change that perspective. The idea of a circus, especially as a random theme for stories that have nothing to do with it, has always just been a little tacky and distracting for me to enjoy, and this one specifically fits that bill. The backgrounds aren't all that visually pleasing, like there's so much going on and it can feel like a mess to look at times. The same can be said for some of the character designs too, like genuinely who woke up and thought, yeah, Mo needs to dress like this. Another one of Turnabout Big Top's blunders is how drawn out and insubstantial the first investigation feels. You really don't find out much about what actually happened and are instead just thrusted into some of the Berry Big Circus's drama, and the drama is that all the characters are creeps. You really don't find much else out during the trial either, like all you do is prove that it's likely that who the witness saw wasn't the defendant. But we have to cross-examine Mo and Trillo, and they are still just as annoying in the trial as they are in the investigation. But so far we have what are by far the worst characters and setting we've seen in the entire series by now, and an investigation and trial that spend too much time being annoying for us to really focus on the mystery. This case is going to have to do wonders to redeem itself. During the second investigation, we get introduced to a new character named Ken Dingling, an acrobat who goes by Acro. Despite how irritating the other members of the circus are, I thought Acro was actually really normal and down to earth.
Look at that, 3 hours into this case and we have our first likable character.
He actually turns out to be pretty important to this case since he was heavily involved in a prior incident at Berry Big Circus, which we see more about as we play through the rest of this case. We learn from Mo and Regina that Acro's brother, Bat, was attacked by a circus lion and that he's still in a coma 6 months later. As good as it is that this case is finally getting some major developments that give us a much better idea about what's going on, it just makes me question the purpose of the previous trial and investigation. Like, that was such a shallow and irritating introduction. Why didn't they shorten it or at least sprinkle in some of of this more important stuff with Acro instead of having us talk to these annoying creeps. Speaking of annoying creeps, it's really only Max, Ben, and Trillo now. Mo is slowly starting to become a little more serious as this case goes on, and he eventually becomes somewhat likable by the second trial segment. That being said, Gumshoe was still in the right to call Mo an annoying character. There's also this part where Gumshoe talks about being whipped by Franziska, then a noise starts playing and he says that noise means she's coming, and then he gets whipped, and as much as I condemn the abuse of Gumshoe,
I just don't get why Franziska's so mean to him.
This small interaction is funnier than all the ones that show Mo and Trillo combined. After Franziska shows up, we get a better idea about her character as she tells us the reason she's getting revenge doesn't have anything to do with her father, who Phoenix took down in the first game. Instead, her motivation for going up against Phoenix in court has something to do with Edgeworth. She and Phoenix inform Maya that after the events of Turnabout Goodbyes and Rise from the Ashes, Edgeworth refused to step foot in a courtroom again and left a note saying, "Prosecutor Miles Edgeworth chooses death." Franziska believes that Edgeworth meant the prosecutor and him died and blames Phoenix for this happening. Once we reach Turnabout Big Top's final trial segment, we spend most of it cross-examining Acro. Mo even says beforehand that Acro is probably the culprit, so most of this trial is figuring out a motive and how Acro could have done it. I personally think this goes on a little too long since the game makes it so obvious that Acro is the culprit, but it's better than cross-examining literally any of the other circus members. Phoenix is eventually able to prove that Acro could have been the killer, but the main issue arises when Phoenix tries to establish a motive. It's likely that Acro is motivated by the accident with his brother and the lion from a couple months ago. However, that doesn't seem to add up as to why Acro would target the ringmaster, and Phoenix proves that he wasn't actually Acro's intended target. Unable to cope with the harm he's caused the whole circus, including himself even, Acro confesses in what is the most tragic ending to a case we've seen thus far. Giving Acro this sad backstory and motive, all while still keeping him this down-to-earth guy, makes for a killer that players can easily try and sympathize with. But what's interesting is the game doesn't encourage you to do so. Even Acro acknowledges that despite his unfortunate circumstances, what he did was wrong, which enforces the game's themes of justice. Another tragic part to this ending is that Regina realizes the weight behind her father's death and what happened with Acro and Bat, which finally puts some substance into a character that needed it. Yet despite how sorrowful this case's ending can be, Mo encourages everyone to move past this, adding a bit of hope to an otherwise unfortunate conclusion. So as bad as Turnabout Big Top can be, it actually has a surprisingly good ending. I mean, once you get past the annoying characters, lame setting, and insubstantial first few hours of this case, it's actually not that bad.
You're making Walt Disney World Quest Magical Racing Tour sound really good right about now.
As good as the ending was, there's still just way too much holding this case back though. The cast became less of an annoyance as this went on, and the story did start picking up a little bit, but it takes so long for all of that to happen because this episode is too busy being annoying for a couple hours. So all parts of this case are remnants of a pretty solid experience. They're buried too deeply beneath all of its issues for Turnabout Big Top to be set free of its stinker status. There are some people that do really like this case though, like listen to this phone call I had with series creator Shu Takumi.
Yeah, Turnabout Big Top, nani iteru no!
Okay, this post is starting to make more sense now.
So despite how much this game has developed the series through everything it's introduced, the case lineup itself really hasn't been anything to write home about, which is crazy because I write home about a lot.
Like seriously, this wasn't even the first letter my dad got that day. The first case was fine, but pretty throwaway. The second one is really good, but has trouble standing out, and I had to get blackmailed into playing the third one. But we still have one more episode left, so let's see what I think about the game one Farewell My Turnabout later. The case begins with Phoenix, Pearl, and Maya attending an award ceremony at the Gatewater Hotel. The winner of the award is the Nickel Samurai, which is a character in the same vein as the Steel Samurai from the first game. But shortly after this, Matt Ongard, who plays the Nickel Samurai, is accused of murdering Juan Carita, who stars in a rivaling show.
Right, so far this is nothing we haven't seen before with an Ace Attorney case, but I could really use a tragedy right about now. That bingo card from earlier is still looking pretty dry. Gosh, I can't believe this happened. I got a bingo!
Maya suddenly getting kidnapped makes this case 1,000 times more interesting. Like, even though we're only at this episode's start, it's already packed full of suspense. The stakes are already so high so early on, making every part of this investigation feel that much more important. And the atmosphere is just so good for this case, like it really communicates just how much is at stake since Phoenix and Pearl act so on edge at the thought of Maya's kidnapping, which makes things that much more investing. So despite the fact this case has barely started, it has already become by far the most captivating one in this whole game because of its high stakes, dreadful atmosphere, and unparalleled suspense. These qualities cause players to desperately want to find out what happens, making it super easy to just get completely sucked in and play this case for hours on end. Like seriously, you couldn't get me away from this game when I was playing this case. Even besides those points, investigating in general is interesting since there's just so much to unpack, and there's this eerie feeling that Matt Engard, Phoenix's client, may not be innocent. There is a reassuring scene where Phoenix and Pearl use Maya's Magatama to determine that Engard didn't kill anybody, and while it rests any nerves players may have about his innocence, it only makes investigating that much more interesting when things make it look like he still did it. We even get an interaction with Franziska that makes it look like we're really going to see more of her character in court, and Gumshoe feels a little more involved than previous cases in this game, so they're really pulling out all the stops for this case. And keep in mind, this is all in the first investigation segment, which is crazy since most trials struggle to build tension this strong, which says a lot considering just how riveting the trials can be. Like, I seriously don't see how they could possibly make this case any more interesting, like they're doing everything you would want out of an introduction. Ah! There's this scene where Franziska starts acting in a way that shows how important winning a trial is to her, when all of a sudden, Miles Edgeworth shows up. I know I poked fun at his inclusion being inevitable, but come on, I'm still freaking out over this.
I mean, I just can't believe they finally brought him back.
Sir, this is a Denny's.
Having him show up in general is already exciting since he's been absent this whole game, but they chose such a good part to reintroduce him. I say that because it makes this a conversation about winning in court for the sole purpose of winning, which is an ideology that Edgeworth seemingly had during the first game since he studied under Manfred von Karma. When Phoenix asks if Edgeworth left because his win record was broken, Edgeworth responds by asking Phoenix why he fights in court. Not only does this question foreshadow a key thematic aspect of this case, but it also communicates the development Edgeworth received in the first game. By the end of the first game, Edgeworth's view of prosecution had become shattered for the better, and during his absence in Justice for All, he re-evaluated the cases that altered his view of his role. Now, the once morally questionable Edgeworth stands in court because of his sense of justice rather than a sense of pride. Edgeworth also tells us some information about the case itself, which mostly revolves around Adrienne Andrews, Matt Engard's manager. There were rumors going around about her being close with the actor Juan Corrida, who was the victim in this case and Engard's rival. However, we find out that she got close to Juan to find out the truth about the death of her mentor, Celeste Impax. Yet even with this information cleared up, the game still causes players to question what the role of Adrienne Andrews is in this case. Then the first investigation is with us playing as Maya in the room where she's being held hostage, which adds even more suspense and intrigue to this intense case that hasn't even reached trial. However, the tension increases further once the trial does start, as Phoenix knows that no matter what, he has to get an acquittal so he can save Maya. Phoenix was told by Maya's kidnapper that he has to get a complete acquittal from Matt Engard, making the not guilty verdict seem more important than ever before. On top of that, things make it seem like this acquittal has to be gained within a day, which constructs an insanely stressful atmosphere. Interestingly, Franziska doesn't show up, which is odd because it seemed like this trial was going to be very important to her character. Well, we eventually learned that she was actually shot in the right shoulder on her way to court, and now there's no way to tell the difference between them. Edgeworth becomes the prosecutor instead, and while it seemed like this trial would have focused on Franziska, giving it to Edgeworth is the right move since the dynamic between him and Phoenix is much more crucial to this case. This line in particular stresses that, as Edgeworth communicates that he finally found the answer as to why he stands in court. He then follows it up by saying this trial will reveal the same to Phoenix, which continues to foreshadow this case's central theme while showcasing that Edgeworth is integral in revealing it. Yet despite Franziska's absence in the courtroom, she's still important to this case, since much of her screen time focuses on why she fights in court, which gives further insight to the themes exhibited by Phoenix and Edgeworth in this episode. Eventually we end up cross-examining Adrienne Andrews, and her role in this case becomes increasingly suspicious. While this trial started with stressful evidence that seemed to incriminate Matt Engard, further deliberation points towards the possibility of Adrienne being the culprit. So many things line up that causes players to think that she did it, but it feels wrong once Phoenix starts pinning her as the potential culprit. Her breakdowns aren't cartoonishly villainous like previous culprits, and instead communicate the idea that Adrian is suffering as a result of the events surrounding this case. The game does such a good job of making it seem like despite all the evidence against her, Adrian shouldn't be pinned as the culprit. Her reactions really make you feel bad for trying to incriminate her, almost as if the game is telling you what you're doing is morally wrong. And when Phoenix tries to implicate Adrian, he even comes off as dislikable and out of character, which continues to make it seem as if incriminating Adrian is unethical. Yet despite how those negatives seem to discourage pinning Adrian Andrews as the culprit, the game continues to make it seem like that has to be done. So much evidence points to the possibility that she did it, the lack of a psych lock makes it seem like Angard is innocent, and most importantly, pinning this on her instead of Matt will save Maya. The game just makes so many good arguments that make it seem unclear which side the player should take, and it really causes players to question if what they're doing is right, but more importantly, it makes Phoenix consider that same question. Throughout the series thus far, a lot of prosecutors have been portrayed in a morally corrupt way. They're the ones accusing the innocent, they've been the characters who've won trials merely for the sake of pride, while the defense have always been the good guys that come out on top. But now, Ace Attorney starts showing that it knows it's much more nuanced than that. Defense attorneys can be just as corrupt, even letting a guilty man walk free despite the fact they know he did it. For the first time in the series, it seems like Phoenix doubting the innocence of his client is the right thing to do. Even Mia, who always encouraged Phoenix to believe in his client's innocence in the first game, starts acting in a way that shows that doing so may not be the right option. Yet once the investigation resumes, it continues with the push and pull coming from each side of this moral dilemma. It starts off by Edgeworth making it clear that Matt Angard is guilty, yet Phoenix still holds on to that hope that he's innocent because it's his only choice if he wants to save Maya. But even when everything points to Matt being guilty, even when the more we find out about this case, the clearer it becomes that Angard is a scumbag, the game still makes you hold on to that desperate sliver of hope that he's innocent. But unfortunately, absolutely nothing you find while investigating makes that hope seem anything but delusional. Every piece of information just makes things seem worse and worse. It makes you want to not even find out anything else, but you know you have to if you want to save Maya, which is such a good way of establishing an even more stressful atmosphere to this tense case. Of course, this already makes the investigation incredibly captivating, but is topped off with so many psych locks that make playing it somehow even more interesting. And one of those psych locks appear on none other than our defendant, Matt Angard. As I mentioned, despite everything that says otherwise, Phoenix and the player still have this desperate hope that Angard is innocent, and the only way to find that out is through this incredibly suspenseful psych lock segment. We break one, then two, and then the truth is revealed. Matt Angard is guilty. While Farewell My Turnabout already had an incredibly devastating mood, this is what really solidifies it. For the first time in series history, Phoenix Wright will be defending a criminal. And it's not just any criminal, this is the most despicable and evil one we've seen thus far, which only makes things more dreadful. The only reason there originally wasn't a psych lock is because Angard didn't actually kill Juan Corrida, but instead hired an assassin by the name of Shelly the Killer, who has actually been the kidnapper calling Phoenix this whole time. Because we keep receiving calls from the killer, we're eventually able to find out that he was holding Maya hostage in Angard's home. The case gets even a little more tense for this moment, but this time the tension is hopeful rather than dreadful. Phoenix and Edgeworth go through every room in the house, adding suspense with every movement the player makes, all for it to be thrown away the moment they enter the room where Maya was being held. The music stops playing, and Maya and the killer are nowhere to be found. Yet when it seems like all hope is lost, Pearl finds a note that Maya left for Phoenix. In the midst of this moral dilemma, when it seems like Phoenix is going to have to get an acquittal for an awful person for Maya's sake, she reassures him that Angard must be found guilty no matter what, and says so knowing her life is at stake if that happens. While we see this note, the game plays a calmer rendition of Maya's theme, almost as if to reassure players that everything will be okay if we follow through with her request. After hours of anguish trying to figure out which path to take, it finally feels like the game is hinting towards a correct answer. By the time the second trial begins, Gumshoe starts searching for Maya and tells Phoenix that he just needs to stall in the courtroom until he can rescue her. Phoenix just has to keep the trial going, and once Maya is found, he can ensure that Angard is convicted. Again, this case continues to be stressful, because while stalling by overanalyzing every piece of information he's given, Phoenix ends up opening more possibilities for Angard to be convicted too early. Every time you press the witness or object to their statement, it adds that much more suspense and terrifies you as to what this might reveal, yet it's clear that this is a risk that must be taken. Gumshoe adds even more suspense, as every call he gives Phoenix has players on the edge of their seats waiting to see what happens. After Phoenix tosses his phone to Edgeworth in what is somehow one of the most investing use of audio and visuals this series has done, Edgeworth understands the situation and tries to help Phoenix and Gumshoe out. Gumshoe has some pieces of evidence that he thinks will help them turn this situation around if Phoenix and Edgeworth can stall for time, and finally, something good. Okay, Gumshoe's car wreck just made things seem even bleaker somehow, but thankfully Edgeworth is able to buy some extra time by having Shelley the Killer testify through radio, only for him to reveal the name of his client. What? In an even more suspenseful turn of events, the killer names Adrian Andrews as his client, even though everyone knows it's really Matt Engard. But the killer naming Adrian Andrews as his client opens the door for Phoenix to answer the question he's been struggling with this whole case. Why stand in court? This is a question that Edgeworth struggled with and eventually found his answer to by now, which is why his inclusion is so crucial in this case. He found a just reason to stand in court that goes against the negative connotations prosecution has, and his inclusion encourages Phoenix to do the same. While Edgeworth has put the question in Phoenix's head towards this case's beginning, this moment finally forces Phoenix to answer the question, why stand in court? Is it to give everyone a defense no matter what they've done? Or is it to serve justice and reveal the truth to set people free from their suffering? This question is answered when Phoenix asks himself which life he has to choose. Save Maya by accusing Adrian and letting Engard go free, or save Adrian by incriminating Engard while risking Maya's life. The game actually lets the player choose, which is genius since it still seems like there isn't a right choice. Even though it seemed like we could save Maya, Gumshoe's car wreck made that seem unlikely, yet the game makes you want to convict Engard so bad, so there's so much pressure coming from both sides. Having the player make the most important decision of this moral dilemma is just so brilliant and immersive, because it really shows you just how hard of a decision Phoenix has to make. Do you side with justice, or save Maya's life? In choosing to find Engard guilty, we see a culmination of this game's themes along with Phoenix's arc throughout this case specifically. Throughout this whole game, we've been solving cases that try to make you feel bad for the true culprit. We see tragic backstories as to why they did what they did, almost as if the game is trying to make you sympathize with them, but it still enforces that these characters must be convicted, even when doing so feels tragic. But convicting Engard feels more tragic than ever before, since you know Maya's life is at stake if that happens. However, letting Engard walk free proves even more devastating, as doing so results in the game's bad ending, which makes players feel awful for neglecting the truth, since doing so only causes suffering for the characters that they hoped to save. Phoenix's struggle with this theme reaches its climax when players are forced to make a decision, and by incriminating Engard, he exhibits his answer as to why he stands in court as a defense attorney. Instead of giving everyone a defense regardless of whether or not they're actually guilty, Phoenix acknowledges that his true purpose as a defense attorney is to reveal truth rather than get a not guilty verdict. Doing so is what's able to set innocent people free from the suffering that others' crimes have caused them, and nowhere else in the game is that idea more apparent than in this case. But no matter which answer you choose, you end up at the edge of your seat, dying to see what happens next as Phoenix hesitates to respond, only for us to be given one last chance to turn things around.
Objection!
When it seems like we won't be able to convict Engard and save Maya at the same time, Franziska shows up, with the evidence that Gumshoe was bringing to court before he crashed. Franziska asks us which piece of evidence we're going to use, and because our answer is so important, the tension gets so much higher, making every question she asks feel that much more important. One of those pieces of evidence is a recording that Engard was going to use to blackmail the killer, and it's clear that we have to show this to the killer to get him to cancel his contract with Engard, but again, the importance of presenting this to the killer makes things so nerve-wracking despite how obvious it is that we have to do so. But when we finally do show it to him, he ends up canceling his contract with Engard and letting Maya go. After terminating their contract, the killer names Engard as his next target, meaning that whether he's acquitted or not, Engard will only suffer, which solidifies that no matter what we do now, Maya will be safe and Engard will face punishment. But what's so satisfying is the game lets us choose whether or not Engard will be found guilty, and it feels so rewarding to give him that guilty sentence that he's been trying so hard to avoid. Equally as rewarding is the way Adrian Andrews responds to all of this. She's been such a tragic character this whole case, and for the first time, she smiles as she thanks Phoenix and Edgeworth for revealing the truth that allowed her to be set free of the suffering that On Guard caused her. But even more rewarding than that is the feeling of relief that comes with finally seeing Maya again. And finally, after all the stress and suspense, we get to relax with our characters celebrating with each other, and it just feels so good to see them all happy again.
I'm so happy to see them happy. They're not real.
So in the end, Farewell My Turnabout is an absolute masterpiece that could not have been better. Everything about this case was top notch. The character writing is arguably the best we've seen yet. The incredibly thought-provoking moral dilemma led to such a great insight to the game's themes. And the suspenseful immersion is unparalleled by any other case to this day. Farewell My Turnabout is without the shadow of a doubt among the best cases in the entire series. And while I'm unsure if I would consider it my absolute favorite, it's definitely up there. But after the credits, we get one final scene, this time between Edgeworth and Franziska, which is such a good addition since even though she wasn't prosecuting in this case, this moment still allows Farewell My Turnabout to develop her character. Having this conversation in this case especially is fitting, since it fits with the motif about why our characters stand in court. Edgeworth had the exact same view as Franziska since they both studied under Manfred, but now that his view has changed, it feels like he's trying to get her to do the same. Yet Franziska never fought for honor or pride like Edgeworth began to detest. Instead, she only sought victory so she could prove herself. She always felt the immense pressure that came with being Manfred von Karma's daughter, and thought she would be able to overcome it if she could only beat Phoenix Wright, the man who broke Manfred's and Edgeworth's win records. Unable to come to terms with her losses, she contemplates giving up prosecuting and leaving the country. Yet Edgeworth convinced her that being a prosecutor is about more than just winning, and uses that to encourage Franziska to pick up her whip and continue prosecuting. This results in her abandoning her motive of trying to escape the shadow of Edgeworth and her father as she vows to return as a better prosecutor. I think this was the perfect way to end the game, since it finally feels like we really get to know who Franziska is after all this time. Under that arrogant and stern persona she had this whole time, Franziska was really just someone who was trying not to get crushed by the weight of the expectations placed on her. The way that revelation humanizes her character changes your perception of her for the better, and ends the game with the thematic character development the series is known for. All things considered, Ace Attorney Justice for All is a sequel with its flaws on a clearer display than its predecessor. It's often considered the throwaway title of the Phoenix Wright trilogy, and while I certainly understand why, I personally find that to be a shame. This game introduced so many important characters, mechanics, and storylines to the Ace Attorney series that helped it improve in ways still seen with some of its more recent entries. Unfortunately, the case lineup is less than stellar, but I don't think it's as bad as many make it out to be. I mean, the Lost Turnabout may not be great, but it's incredibly inoffensive, and I think Reunion in Turnabout is really good despite it feeling basic at times. Of course, I still think Turnabout Big Top is pretty bad, even though it's slowly improved, but I wouldn't say it's bad enough to ruin the whole game, especially considering that it's followed up by the masterpiece that is Farewell My Turnabout. That case alone validates Justice for All as a worthwhile experience, but even without it, there's still a lot of things this game achieved that make it a good sequel even though it has its fair share of flaws. Because despite the game's obvious issues, it did a great job developing returning characters, establishing new ones, expanding the world and gameplay, and masterfully dealt with themes that only felt natural for the series to touch on, which makes Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, Justice for All a great sequel.